Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Today we're going to take a look at how to create and use your own guitar speaker impulse responses. So what is an impulse response? Also known as an IR, an impulse response is basically a digital capture of the sonic characteristics of, in this case, a guitar cabinet. You can have other types of impulse responses as well. Once you've captured the characteristics of the cabinet, you can then apply those characteristics to other signals. So we could, for example, run a guitar preamp in and apply the sound of the speaker cabinet to that guitar preamp. You could also use a plug-in and use a different impulse response to get a specific cabinet sound that you want. You could use an amplifier silently through a load box and apply a impulse response later to get the sound of it going through a cabinet. And you can even get super creative and use impulse responses on other kinds of tracks. For example, run your vocals through a guitar cabinet, see what that sounds like, or maybe your drums or any other source. So you can really get creative with these. It gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of power when you're producing in the studio. Plus, it's just fun to make your own impulse responses. Today we'll take a look at 3 different ways you can do this. The first way is by far the easiest, and that's to either download free impulse responses off the web or buy impulse responses from someone who's made them before. There are tons of these available out there. For example, at sweetwater.com, we carry impulse responses that were made by Eminence, the speaker manufacturer, so you know they're going to be really accurate to those original speakers. And there are other companies that specialize in making different impulse responses for different applications. And then there are sites where end users are uploading literally thousands of different impulse responses that you can download and use in your own impulse response loader. The other way is you can make your own impulse responses, and it's pretty easy to do. Basically what you need is an impulse, which is a really short pop or transient that you route through the speaker, and then you record that speaker with a microphone back into your DAW, and that creates your impulse response. You can get those original impulse pops, if you will, or transients in 2 ways. You can, of course, download them. There are places on the web where you can find a free impulse response sample that you can download, or you can make your own. So let's look at both ways here. So to begin, I'm in Pro Tools, and I have downloaded a white noise sample. It's at 48 kilohertz. You can also get them at 96 kilohertz, 44.1 kilohertz. It depends on what you're going to do with them, what sample rate you want. And I've got it at 24 bits, which is what you want for the best resolution of your sample. So you can see that this is a really, really short little spike in the signal here. If we zoom in, oops, now we've lost it. Scroll over here. It literally is just one sample long. Very, very short. You can see that we're zoomed in about as far as we can go in Pro Tools. Maybe one more notch or 2. So that's about as far as we can go in Pro Tools, and we're seeing just a single sample there. Now when I route that out of an output from my interface, I've got an SSL12 here, so I'm taking one of the extra outputs and routing that into a power amp. We'll talk about the power amp in just a second, and then that's driving my speaker cabinet. When I play it, you hear just a short pop. So it's just a snap, just like that. And that's all we need to activate that speaker in that cabinet. That'll give us the full frequency response of the speaker, as well as any resonances and things that are in that speaker cabinet as well. So I mentioned the power amplifier. I'm coming out of my SSL12, and what I'm coming into is basically a PA-style power amplifier. And the reason for that is I want a really clean, transparent power amplifier to amplify my signal. I don't want that power amplifier coloring the signal, because if I do, that coloration is going to be part of my impulse response, and it'll be part of what's applied to my other signals as well. So let me give you an example. Say you're recording a Marshall amplifier through a load box, so you can do it silently. If you then go back and apply an impulse response that also has amplifier coloration on it, that's going to also be applied on top of that Marshall, and it's not going to work as well as you want. So typically, you're going to want to run through the cleanest possible power amp you can. If you don't have a separate power amp, then what I'd recommend is that you go into, say, the effects return on an amplifier, so you're just getting the power amp section and use that to drive your speaker cabinet. If you do that, you may need a reamp box. My favorite is the Radial X amp. That's the one I use all the time, but basically this just converts the line output from your audio interface into a guitar level output that you could route into your amplifier. Okay, so once we have our signal coming out of your DAW, into your interface, back out into your power amplifier and into your cabinet, you're pretty much ready to go. At this point, we just need to record it back in. Getting back to our impulse inside the computer that we're using to drive this, the one I have here, as I mentioned, is one that I downloaded from the web, but it's also very easy to create your own. All we need to do is take white noise, record it to a track, and then cut out a single sample of that. Let's take a look at how to do that. All you need is a signal generator inside your DAW. So I've got 2 tracks that I've created here. This first track at top with the label noise generator has the Pro Tools signal generator in it, and I've got it set for a white noise signal. Just about any DAW will come with a signal generator of some type that allow you to get that white noise signal. White noise is simply equal power over all the frequencies of the spectrum, so it tends to be fairly bright. It's a little bit aimed toward the top end, weighted toward the top end, if you will, but it's also a very balanced signal that covers the whole frequency range. So I've got this noise generator. What I'm going to do is record that to a second track. So I'm going to record just a little bit of this because we don't need much. We'll set this here. I've got the signal feeding in. You can see it on the meter here. And let's just record a little bit of that. Okay. Actually, I need to go back here. Hang on once. This is all good, but I need to do something. I need to mute this track. There we go. Okay. So now I've recorded my white noise. Let's zoom way in on this till we get down to the single sample level. Now, we want to switch our view inside our DAW to where what we're looking at is one sample. All right, so we've zoomed way in, and we'll set our grid for one sample. Each of these divisions now is a single sample. So we'll just take one here. And basically what we're going to do is cut that so we can delete what's in front of it. We'll delete what's behind it. Now we have a single sample, and that should give us our same. Let's route this out of our output into our amplifier. And you can hear that it's the exact same thing that we had before. So we've created just a single transient based on that white noise, and that's what we'll use to activate our speaker cabinet when we're recording. So we'll jump back here. I'm going to zoom back out. What I like to do is leave about a second of space before and a second of space afterward. That way I've just got a big enough chunk that I can actually see what I'm doing when I'm recording, because a single sample is going to go by very quickly. At 48 kilohertz, there's 48,000 of those per second. So that's a very, very short little transient that we're looking at there. What I've done now is I've set my grid back to 1 second increments. That's what these divisions are here. And this is my sample that's stuck right here on the 1 second point, because what I'm going to do is actually record about a 2-second segment here. I'm going to bounce that out so that I can actually see what's happening, because that one is so tiny it's almost hard to orient there. So I'm going to go ahead and consolidate that into a new segment, which is right here. There we go. So you can see we have a 2-second long clip here, and right in the center of that is our impulse that we're going to use to drive our cabinet. Now, to capture the impulse, let's change to this view where I've got my impulse here. This is going to feed out through a output, again, output 3 from my SSL. It's going to go into the cabinet, through the power amplifier into the cabinet. And then I've got an SM57 that's placed in front of the speaker on this cabinet, which, by the way, is a Victory cabinet. So we've got an SM57 positioned where I like to put this microphone. We're going to bring that signal back in and record it to this second track here. So if I just play this, we'll set this to input. You'll see the meter flash when that impulse goes by. It goes so fast you can just barely see it. So what we want to do is be sure we've got a good level going in. You can't really go by this here because that transient is so quick that the meter can't even respond to it. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger so we can see it. And we should be just fine. So now I'm going to record that impulse back into my DAW. Awesome. That's all we need to do. Okay, now we're almost done. At this point, we want to edit that impulse response down so that it is exactly at the start of the impulse. We don't want any blank space before the impulse starts playing. And we also want to trim it down to between, say 20 and 40 milliseconds in length, because any longer than that, you're going to start hearing the room more than you are the actual cabinet. We just want that cabinet response right at the beginning that we can apply to our signals. So let's zoom in here a bit. Scroll over here. I'm going to make my track a little bit bigger so we can see what this actually looks like. You can see it there. There's our waveform. Let's make this a little bit bigger so we can really see. Now, we'll zoom in, and we want to clip this or trim the beginning right to the very start of that impulse. So let's select that, cut that out, and now when we play this, it's going to start right at the very beginning of the impulse. And again, we want to cut that down to about 40 milliseconds is probably what we want here, 20 to 40. So let's take this over to the beginning of our track. Okay, so I've moved my impulse to the beginning of my track, and now I'm going to set my grid to show me 10 millisecond increments. So here's 10, here's 20, here's 30. You can see by that point we've pretty well gotten to the end of this. If we go to 40, we're here. Let's go ahead and do 40. All right, so we'll scroll that back like that. If we clip it right at 40 milliseconds, in Pro Tools the command is B. Chop that off. There we have our impulse response. The quality of the impulse response is what really matters here. And the way you achieve the quality that you want from your impulse response is by getting the sound you want from the cabinet first. So make sure your cabinet sounds great in your room. If the cabinet doesn't sound great, you're never going to get a good impulse response. So take the time to set that up, plug an amp in, plug your guitar in, make it sound exactly the way that you want with that cabinet. Then the real art of the whole thing comes into play, and that's placing the microphone to get the exact sound that you want out of the cabinet. And again, there can be a lot of trial and error involved in that, and that's okay. So just take your microphone. In my case, I've got an SM57, which is a pretty tried and true microphone for recording guitar cabinets. I like to start somewhere around where the cone meets the dust cover in the center and move from there to get a good balance of highs and lows to get a nice balanced tone out of it. But you may like the sound closer on the dust cap. Maybe it'll be a little brighter or out toward the edge or maybe halfway in between, maybe pulled back a little bit. So these are all things you can experiment with. Do that, record different impulse responses with all those settings, remember what you've done, and choose the one that you like the best. Once you've got your impulse response or your IR captured back into your DAW and you've got it edited down, now at this point you could use it just as it is, just as a raw impulse response. Nothing wrong with that at all. It may be exactly what you want. You could also choose to equalize that a little bit, or some people choose to run it through like a transformer emulator or some type of analog simulator to give it just a little bit of grid, a little bit more of analog body, if you will. So you can choose to do that if you want, or just use the raw one. Whatever it is, when you're finished, go ahead and select that and now bounce it out or consolidate it, whatever your DAW does, to make it into a WAV file. I'm going to go ahead and consolidate that first of all into a single file. Now I'm going to go ahead and bounce that out as a WAV file. So I'll choose Bounce Mix. I want it to be a WAV file. File name will be IR Victory. We want it to be a mono. We can do multiple monos fine at 48 kilohertz. We'll put it into bounced files. We don't need an MP3 of this, and hit bounce. All right, and we're finished. So now at this point, we have that file in the bounced files folders inside my Pro Tools session or whatever DAW you're using, and now I can choose to load that into an IR loader, and that's how you actually put this to work. So IR loaders come in a lot of different forms and fashions. You can use IRs with hardware devices. Mesa Boogie makes their cab clone IR, as well as some of their amplifiers can load IRs and use them for direct out. Soldano, Kemper, Line 6, Neural DSP with the Quad Cortex and the Nano Cortex, IK Multimedia with the Tonex. There's a whole range of different things that are hardware that can load IRs. The Friedman pedals, for example, the IRX and the IRD could load those both. There also are dedicated IR loader pedals from everyone from Engel to Hot Tone to Boss. So a lot of different options for TC Electronic makes one. These are little pedals that just load up an IR and apply the characteristics of that speaker IR onto your signal. Now what we'll do is show you how you can use this IR. In this case, I'll be doing it within a software plugin, but the same thing applies with you're using hardware or a pedal or whatever it might be. So let's take a look at how this works in the real world, if you will. So I've got my Pro Tools session opened up, and what I have is I've installed the Tonex plugin from IK Multimedia here. Now, Tonex plugin contains all kinds of different captures of amplifiers and speaker cabinets and things, but it also allows you to add your own IRs in, and that's what we're going to do here today. So I'm going to put on my headphones so I can hear what we're doing also. So this is one of the presets in Tonex, using their Black Angus cabinet here. Now if we go down, we can choose Custom IR, and you can see here, you can search for your IRs, which I've already done, and this is the IR that we captured, and you can see that that's now been loaded in as our cabinet. Completely different sound than the one that came with Tonex, of course. We can switch back to that. And then our custom. So whether you prefer one tone or the other is sort of irrelevant in this case. We're just using this as an example. I set up the cabinet and just stuck a microphone on it. But take your time, get the cabinet sounding the way you want it, get the capture sounding the way that you want it, and then when you load that IR into whatever IR loader you're using, you'll get great results. I hope you've enjoyed this quick look at how to make and use your own impulse responses, or IRs. It's something that it's well worth knowing how to do, and something that's well worth spending some time to capture your own custom IRs so you can have your own tones, your own sounds exactly when you want them. If you have questions about this process or any of the many products that we mentioned during this video, head over to sweetwater.com, or better yet, contact your Sweetwater sales engineer. They've got all the answers for you. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.